I'm Mike Papantonio. Several years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court granted a level of immunity to generic drug makers. Recently, the court heard arguments on a case that would extend that immunity. The Obama administration has made it clear that they're going to support this immunity, and I've got attorneys Howard Nations and Michael Berg with me now to follow the Obama money trail on this drug maker decision. Howard, it's amazing to me that every time we believe that this president is there for consumers or for the average American, he surprises us again. It's almost like his lips are moving, he's telling us what we want to hear, but then he does just the opposite of what matters. Howard, talk about the Bartlett case. I want both you and Mike to give your impressions and see if they're the same as mine about this administration.
Well, Karen Bartlett is a 56-year-old woman who did what a lot of other Americans do. She had shoulder pain and she went out and bought a very simple anti-inflammatory that was prescribed by her doctor. They're called NSAIDs, and it's non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. It's the same thing. Most popular one is ibuprofen. This particular one was a generic form of Clinaril, which is known as Sulindac. Now, what happened is this woman who went in for simple pain relief in her shoulder developed this toxic epithermal necrolysis, and she spent 2 months in a burned unit, which her doctor described at the trial as being hell on earth.
Basically, Howard, if I got it right, her skin simply burns off. Is that correct?
She lost 2/3 of her skin, she damaged her lungs, and most importantly, despite 13 eye operations, she's now legally blind.
Okay, let me go to Mike. Mike, let me ask you, now we have this administration who is saying that the case is before the Supreme Court as to whether or not we should let this drug company get away with almost killing this woman, a horrible, horrible injury. Her body basically burned up. She's in the hospital. Damages come back. I think a jury awards them $21 million, which still doesn't capture the suffering this woman went through. The case is going up to the Supreme Court, and lo and behold, the Obama administration is siding with the drug companies. Really?
Mike, let me first tell you. Well, number one, I've had cases with Stevens-Johnson syndrome, and the burning occurs from the inside out. Any doctor who's in a burn unit is going to tell you it's the most painful burns you can have. It burns off the skin inside out. This woman suffered terribly. The Supreme Court and this administration have bonded together to make sure consumers don't have rights in the legal system and have access to get damages like this from pharmaceutical companies. This case and the Mensing case are the example of that. These Supreme Court justices are there for the pharmaceutical companies, for the big corporations, and the administration is in line with them to keep consumers from being able to get compensation for injuries that are serious like this. It's awful.
Howard, let me ask, how could we have been so wrong about this president, Howard? I mean, how is it that we have been so wrong in gauging what this president is really about where it comes to taking care of consumers?
Well, what's so shocking about this particular case, Mike, is the fact that in the original opinion, which Mike just alluded to, the Mensing case, the Attorney General or the administration sided with the plaintiff in that case and asked that the state law prevail over the FDA rulings. In this case,
in other words, they sided against the drug companies, sided against the FDA, and actually were there on behalf of consumers, which is exactly the opposite of this case, correct?
Right, and this is exactly the same case. It's the same issue. It's whether the state law should prevail over the federal FDA regulation. That was the same issue precisely in Mensing, but in this case it's about a design defect. In the previous case it was about failure to warn, and the administration is going against the consumer in this case.
Well, to make this simple, Mike, let me go to you, where this woman is left with almost her entire body burned up. The company absolutely knew that there was the potential for this happening, but they underwarned. You know, if you take a look at the warning, they don't say, oh, by the way, this product can cause all the skin on your body to simply slough off, and you have to have skin grafts over 90% of your body. But in this situation, This woman, if the U.S. Supreme Court rules in a predictable way, because this is the 1% Supreme Court. They are there for corporate America. They're not there for consumers. But if they rule against this woman, what the message is that if you take a generic drug and the generic kills you, that you don't have the right to proceed because you're protected with some type of absurd immunity that has been trumped up by this administration and by the Supreme Court.
Yeah,
did
absolutely.
I get that right?
What they're saying is you're on your own. You're on your own. You're stuck with your medical bills. You're going to end up being on the tax rolls. You're going to be there trying to get through your life as this woman, Mrs. Bartlett's going to be doing it. And what really has happened here is the pharmaceutical companies' money and power have bought their way into our Supreme Court and into this administration. This is something that we have to stop, and the American people have to stop, and we need to make sure that the voice is being heard, which is, look, we're not going to let the pharmaceutical companies go out and kill people, and we're not going to have any recourse.
Howard, you and Mike are in front of judges all over America all the time, in front of the biggest, with the biggest cases in this country. Would you please tell me how often you see a situation where the FDA has absolutely been just joined at the hip with a pharmaceutical company that is committing fraud, that's committing perjury in the way they go about presenting their case, that's covering up, phoning up clinical data? I mean, isn't this a scene that you and Mike see day after day, time and time again?
Unfortunately, you're right, Mike. This is a scene that we see all the time. And the sad part about this is this doesn't have to go to the Supreme Court, and it doesn't matter what the Supreme Court does with the Bartlett decision, because the FDA itself, which is part of the executive branch, which is under the President of the United States, the FDA can make all of this go away and reinstate the right of 80% of drug users. Understand, generic drugs, what they're wiping out, generic drugs are 80% of the drug sales in America. The FDA can change all this with a simple one-page rule change, and they have failed and refused to do it.
You met with the head of the FDA about this, didn't you, Howard? You and Mike Berg has been involved in the same thing. But tell me how your meeting went with the FDA in this regard.
Well, we met with Health and Human Services, and we had very good response from the Health and Human Services. But when it gets over to the FDA has really stalled on it, and it's been pending for quite a while now, and there's an application pending by Public Citizen that they need to act on, which specifically is requesting this as a safety issue. This is a major safety issue, and they've refused to act on this as a safety issue. All this takes is a one-page rule change, and you can believe it will never get through a Republican Congress. And if it doesn't get through the Supreme Court, which it probably won't, it's going to fall back to the FDA, back to the executive branch. And if they don't act, then rights of 80% of drug users in this country are obliterated. And you never know it until it happens to, like it did to Ms. Bartlett.
Mike Berg, you handle these cases, pharmaceutical drug company, time after time. It's the same story. The drug company phonies up clinical data. They hide the truth from doctors. They hide the truth from consumers. And then FDA is there for them, protecting them. What does this process leave? What kind of protection does the consumer have at all in a setting like that? What do you tell a person who has lost a child or lost a family member because of a bad drug? It happens to be a generic drug, therefore you don't have a lawsuit against the generic company.
Well, first of all, that's a hard thing to say, but we all have to do it from time to time. And what I try to tell them is, look, it's what's going on in the system. It's the administration. It's the FDA. Write your congressman. You know what? If we can get Congress, and I agree with Howard, they may not be ready to pass the bill, but if the pressure's put on the administration from the Democrats in the House and in the Senate, maybe we can get the administration to move on this. People have to get up and shout, we're not going to take this. We're not going to allow this to happen. They have have to do something, because otherwise we're going to have children dying, people who are catastrophically injured, and they're going to have no recourse because the pharmaceutical company has got their fingers in the till with the FDA, promising jobs to people at the FDA when they get out of the FDA. We know that as a fact. We know people are basically leaving the FDA and getting big money jobs with big pharma. It all has to stop, and we have to make it stop.
Howard Nations, you have been somebody who's been up front on behalf of consumers since as long as I've known you. If consumers knew what your history is on behalf of them, they'd be very proud to listen to what you have to say. In this setting, you actually went to Washington on many occasions. You were one of the chief lobbyists on, against the drug companies' effort to do away with protection for consumers. What do you make of this president? What is it that we just so poorly misjudged about this president?
The only thing I can say is if you look at the mincing case, which happened before the election, the administration sided with the consumer. When we tried to meet with the FDA to discuss this, they said, well, let's wait till after the election. We don't want to do anything on this until after the election. And then after the election, now that it's coming up again, same issue is coming up again, the administration is now siding with the pharmaceutical companies. Yeah,
so what we see, Howard, sometimes you see drug cases, the actual, it shouldn't be just damages, people should go to jail. But we have an administration, obviously under the hand of the Department of Justice, that is not willing to, their opinion is that if a corporation's too big, we can't prosecute them at all. But in this situation, it's even worse than that. We have an administration that says, no, not only do we not want to prosecute them, we don't even want to be held accountable financially. Let me ask you this, Howard. You got 1 minute. Let me leave it with you. What is it that we do about this? What can be done?
Well, the thing that was most depressing about this, not only is the administration supporting the pharmaceutical industry on this, but the Solicitor General actually requested time from the U.S. Supreme Court to argue, oral argument, by the government on behalf of the pharmaceutical companies. Absolutely outrageous. The only thing that can be done about this is pressure on the administration, because the only people that are going to fix this, unfortunately, are the FDA. Public Citizen is trying, American Trial Lawyers is trying, various lobbyists for consumers are trying hard to bring pressure. We have senators who are trying, they're sending letters over to the FDA. They're getting no response. A new bill has been proposed in the United States Senate, which is just a one-paragraph bill which would solve this problem, but it won't solve the problem either.
I am glad you and Mike Berg are out front on this. Keep up the good work. Keep up the fight. We can only ask that this president deliver on some of the promises he gave us while he was running. Thanks.
Thank you.